Thomas Barrow was dead. They said it was suicide. A gun beside his body. But the townspeople whispered something else. Barrow had been silenced. When the news reached Cypress Grove, Catherine stood very still. Ezekiel watched her carefully. "You expected this?" She nodded. "Yes. Whitaker." "Most likely." Ezekiel crossed his arms. "That means the brethren are already cleaning their own house." Catherine's eyes drifted toward the plantation. "And that means they're scared." Judith approached them nervously. "Miss Catherine, your father just received a letter." Catherine's expression sharpened. "From who?" "Judge Whitaker." Silas Rutledge read the message twice. His hands trembled slightly. Across from him in the study, Catherine pretended to stare blankly out the window. Ezekiel stood quietly near the door. Silas folded the letter slowly. "Barrow is dead." Catherine tilted her head. "Dead?" "Shot himself." She laughed softly. "People shoot themselves often around your friends, father." Silas glared at her. "Stay out of matters you don't understand." But Catherine continued staring at the letter in his hand. "The brethren must be upset." Silas said nothing. Which told her everything. Finally he looked at Ezekiel. "Take her outside." "Yes, sir." As they walked out of the study, Catherine whispered quietly. "He knows." Ezekiel nodded. "Yes. Not everything. But enough to worry." That evening, Silas Rutledge did something unusual. He went down to the cellar alone. Ezekiel noticed it first. From the back hallway he saw Silas carrying a lantern toward the hidden pantry door. Minutes later, the floor above the cellar creaked. Catherine stood beside him. "He's checking the records." "Yes. If he discovers the ledger is missing." Ezekiel didn't finish the sentence. "He didn't need to." Catherine looked toward the dark staircase. "We can't let him warn the others." "And how do we stop him?" Catherine's voice dropped to a whisper. "We make him believe something worse." Ezekiel frowned slightly. What could be worse than betrayal? Catherine's eyes slowly lifted toward the storm clouds gathering again above the plantation. Fear. A few minutes later, a scream echoed from the cellar. Silas Rutledge stumbled back up the staircase. His face pale. His breathing heavy. He slammed the hidden door shut and locked it. Then he rushed down the hallway toward his study. Ezekiel and Catherine remained hidden in the shadows. "What happened?" Ezekiel asked. Catherine held up a small object in her hand. A piece of chalk. With it, she had drawn something inside the cellar. A symbol. One the brethren used during their rituals. But this one was different. Because beside the symbol, she had written 3 words. "We are watching." Ezekiel looked at her carefully. "You want him afraid?" "Yes. And when fear spreads through the brethren." Catherine's voice became colder than the night air. "They'll all come to the next gathering ready for war." Lightning flashed across the sky. The storm finally broke over Cypress Grove. Rain poured across the fields. Thunder shook the plantation house. And somewhere inside that house, Silas Rutledge sat alone in his study, staring at the message he had just seen in the cellar. Because for the first time in many years, the brethren of the harvest were no longer hunting. Someone was hunting them. Rain pounded against the roof of Cypress Grove all night. The storm refused to leave. Thunder rolled across the fields like distant cannon fire. Inside the big house, Silas Rutledge did not sleep. He sat in his study with a lantern burning low beside him. The image from the cellar would not leave his mind. The symbol. And the message beside it. We are watching. Someone knew. Someone had been inside the cellar. Inside the one place the brethren believed was completely hidden. Silas poured another glass of whiskey. His hands trembled slightly. For the first time in years, he felt something he hated. Uncertainty. Outside the study door. Catherine stood silently in the hallway. Ezekiel waited beside her. Is he still awake? Ezekiel whispered. Yes. How long? Hours. Catherine looked toward the closed study door. He's afraid. Ezekiel nodded slowly. And when fear takes hold, men like him make mistakes. Morning arrived gray and cold. The rain finally slowed. Workers returned to the rice fields under the watch of the overseers. But something had changed inside the plantation house. Silas called for Ezekiel before breakfast. When Ezekiel entered the study, Silas looked worse than he had the night before. Dark circles under his eyes. Wrinkles deeper across his face. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. The brethren are meeting earlier. Ezekiel pretended to read it carefully. When? 5 nights from now. Ezekiel kept his voice calm. That seems sudden. Silas stared at him. They believe someone is interfering. Ezekiel said nothing. Silas leaned forward. Did Catherine leave her room last night? Ezekiel's expression didn't change. No, sir. Silas studied him for several seconds. Trying to find doubt. Trying to find fear. But Ezekiel remained completely still. Finally Silas leaned back. Good. He folded the letter again. Because if someone is playing games with the brethren. His voice hardened. They won't live long enough to regret it. Ezekiel left the study slowly. Catherine was waiting in the hallway. Well? The meeting moved. When? 5 nights. For a moment Catherine said nothing. Then a slow smile appeared on her face. Even better. Ezekiel raised an eyebrow. Why better? Because fear is spreading faster than we expected. That afternoon, word of Thomas Barrow's death reached the entire county. People whispered in town. Some believed the story of suicide. Others didn't. But everyone knew one thing. Barrow had been part of something powerful. And powerful men rarely died quietly. That evening, a second carriage arrived at Cypress Grove. Catherine watched from the upstairs window. Another one, she murmured. Ezekiel stepped beside her. Who is it? Samuel Dunning. The banker climbed out of the carriage with hurried steps. He didn't wait for servants. He walked straight into the house. Minutes later, angry voices echoed from the study. Catherine moved closer to the door. She and Ezekiel listened from the hallway. Dunning's voice was sharp. You should have told us sooner. Silas snapped back. I just discovered it myself. You expect me to believe that? I'm telling you what I saw. What exactly did you see? Silas lowered his voice. But they could still hear him. A message. Dunning scoffed. A message? Yes. What did it say? Silas hesitated. Then he spoke the words. We are watching. Silence followed. Then Dunning spoke again, but this time his voice was quieter. Someone is trying to scare us. Silas replied coldly. It's working. Dunning paced across the room. The others must know. They will. When? At the gathering. Dunning stopped walking. And if this person reveals the brethren? Silas answered slowly. Then we remove them. The way he said it made the hallway feel colder. Dunning eventually left the house an hour later. But when he stepped outside, Catherine noticed something interesting. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked worried. Very worried. That night, Catherine and Ezekiel sat in a small cabin again. The leather book lay open on the table. Only 12 names now. Barrows had already been crossed out. Catherine tapped the next name. Samuel Dunning. Ezekiel looked up. You think he's next? He's nervous. And nervous men do desperate things. Ezekiel leaned back slightly. What kind of desperate? Catherine's eyes moved toward the dark plantation house. The kind that destroy alliances. Ezekiel was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question he had been holding back. When the brethren are gone. Catherine looked at him. What happens to your father? The candle flickered between them. Catherine didn't answer right away. Instead she closed the ledger slowly. Then she whispered something so calm, it felt almost terrifying. My father isn't last on the list. Ezekiel frowned slightly. Then who is? Catherine's eyes turned toward the house again. The man who leads them. Ezekiel felt a chill run through him. You mean there's someone above your father? Yes. Who? Catherine opened the ledger again. She turned to the final page. One name was written there. But unlike the others, this one was written in darker ink. Older ink. A name with more power than the rest. Ezekiel read it silently. Then he looked up slowly. Judge Whitaker. Catherine nodded. He controls the courts. The law. The judges. If the brethren ever faced trial, he would protect them. Lightning flashed again outside the cabin. The storm was returning once more. Ezekiel stared at the final name in the book. So he's the real leader. Yes. And he'll be at the gathering. Catherine closed the book. Her voice dropped into a cold whisper. Oh, he never misses a ritual. Thunder shook the sky above Cypress Grove. And somewhere deep beneath the plantation house. The cellar waited. 5 nights from now. The brethren of the harvest would gather again. But this time. They wouldn't realize the trap had already been set. The next morning arrived heavy and gray. Low clouds covered the sky above Cypress Grove. The air felt thick, like the world itself was holding its breath. Only 4 nights remained before the gathering. 4 nights before the brethren would return to the cellar. Catherine stood near the garden fence watching the rice fields. Workers moved slowly through the muddy water. Overseers shouted from horseback. The plantation looked peaceful. But Catherine knew better. Behind the calm, something was building. Ezekiel walked toward her from the cabins. You didn't sleep. Catherine didn't turn. Did you? No. Silence stretched between them for a moment. Then Ezekiel spoke quietly. Fear is spreading through the brethren. Yes. But fear can make people unpredictable. Catherine finally looked at him. That's why we guide it. Later that afternoon, another message arrived. This one was different. It didn't come to Silas. It came to Samuel Dunning. But it wasn't delivered to his home. It was delivered in town. Left on the table where he drank every evening. The message contained only a single sentence. Thomas Barrow died before he could speak. Dunning read it twice. Then a third time. His hands slowly began to shake. Across the room. Ezekiel watched from the corner. Dunning looked around the tavern. Suspicious. Paranoid. He knew the truth now. Barrow had not killed himself. Someone had killed him. And whoever it was, knew everything. Dunning left the tavern immediately. That night, he rode his horse all the way to Cypress Grove. Catherine saw the lanterns from his carriage approaching through the dark. He's here again, she whispered. Ezekiel nodded. Good. Inside the house. Dunning burst into Silas's study without knocking. You told me Barrow killed himself. Silas looked irritated. That's what the sheriff reported. Dunning threw the letter onto the desk. Then explain this. Silas picked it up and read the message. His face tightened. Where did you get this? It was waiting for me. Silas stood slowly. This is someone trying to divide us. Dunning's voice rose. Or someone who knows the truth. Silas slammed his hand on the desk. Control yourself. Dunning leaned closer. You said someone left a message in the cellar. Yes. And now I receive this. He shook his head. No, someone inside the Brethren is talking. Silas's eyes narrowed. You think I would betray the group? Dunning hesitated. Just for a moment. But that moment said everything. Silas saw it. And his expression turned cold. You fool. Dunning took a step back. You expect me to trust anyone right now? The argument continued for nearly an hour. Voices rising. Accusations flying. Catherine and Ezekiel listened from the hallway again. They're turning on each other, Ezekiel whispered. Catherine nodded. But not enough yet. Inside the study. Dunning suddenly said something that made both of them freeze. What about your daughter? Silas's chair scraped across the floor. What about her? She was in the house the night Barrow died. Silas laughed harshly. My daughter can barely walk across a room. But what if? Silas cut him off. She's insane. Dunning didn't respond right away. Then he said quietly. Sometimes the best hiding place for a secret is madness. Silence filled the study. Outside the door. Catherine felt her heart beat faster. Dunning was closer to the truth than she expected. Inside the study. Silas spoke again. If you believe my daughter is behind this, then you're more frightened than I thought. Dunning finally sighed. Maybe I am. He picked up his coat. The gathering needs to happen now. It will, Silas replied. 3 nights. Dunning left soon after. But this time, the fear stayed behind in the house. Catherine walked back toward the garden slowly. Ezekiel followed. He suspects you, Ezekiel said quietly. Yes. That's dangerous. Catherine stopped walking. Good. Ezekiel frowned. Why good? Because suspicion breaks trust. She turned to face him. And when the Brethren stopped trusting each other, they stopped working together, Ezekiel finished. Catherine nodded. Night fell slowly over Cypress Grove. But this night felt different. Heavier. The storm clouds returned again. Lightning flashed across the sky. In the small cabin. Catherine opened the leather ledger once more. She crossed another name with the tip of her pen. Thomas Barrow. Then she moved to the next one. Samuel Dunning. Ezekiel watched quietly. You think he'll be the next to fall? Catherine closed the book slowly. No. Ezekiel looked confused. Then why mark him? Catherine looked toward the plantation house, where the windows glowed in the darkness. Because tonight. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He's going to do something very stupid. Thunder cracked across the sky again. At that exact moment, a rider appeared on the distant road leading toward town. Samuel Dunning. Riding fast. Riding alone. And he wasn't riding to his home. He was riding toward the sheriff's office. Because fear had finally pushed him over the edge. Samuel Dunning was about to betray the Brethren. And he didn't realize something important. He wouldn't live long enough to finish his confession. Samuel Dunning rode through the night like a man being chased by ghosts. The road to town was dark. Rain had turned the dirt path into thick mud. But he didn't slow down. Fear pushed him forward. The letter still burned in his mind. Thomas Barrow died before he could speak. Someone knew. Someone was watching. And if the brethren suspected he might talk, he would end up just like Barrow. Dead. By the time Dunning reached town, the lanterns in the sheriff's office were still burning. He burst through the door, breathing hard. Sheriff Collins looked up from his desk. "Mr. Dunning? I need protection." Collins frowned. "Protection from who?" Dunning's voice dropped. "There's a group in this county, powerful men." Collins leaned back in his chair. "What kind of men?" Dunning hesitated. He had spent years protecting their secrets. But now fear had broken something inside him. The brethren of the harvest. The sheriff's expression didn't change. But something strange happened. He slowly closed the ledger on his desk. Then he stood. "You shouldn't have said that name." Dunning froze. "What?" Collins walked around the desk slowly. "Some secrets keep this county running." Dunning felt the blood drain from his face. "You're part of it." The sheriff didn't answer. But his silence was enough. Dunning backed toward the door. "You can't do this." Collins sighed. "I'm afraid I can." Two deputies stepped in behind Dunning. He didn't even see them coming. The next morning, the town woke to another death. Samuel Dunning had been found outside the sheriff's office. A gun beside his body. Another suicide. 2 members of the brethren dead in 1 week. And the fear inside the secret society grew deeper. Back at Cypress Grove, Silas Rutledge was furious. He slammed the newspaper onto his desk. Another one. Judge Whitaker stood near the window, his silver cane resting against the floor. Dunning was weak, the judge said calmly. Silas shook his head. 2 deaths in 1 week. Whitaker's eyes narrowed. "That is not coincidence. You think someone is targeting us?" Whitaker didn't answer right away. He simply stared out the window toward the distant rice fields. "Fear is spreading through the brethren," he finally said. Silas paced across the room. "We should cancel the gathering." Whitaker turned slowly. "No." Silas looked shocked. "You want to meet after this?" "Yes." "Why?" Whitaker's voice became colder. "Because whoever is doing this will expect us to hide." Silas hesitated. "And if they're watching?" Whitaker smiled slightly. "Then we let them watch." The judge picked up his cane. "And when they reveal themselves?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "We destroy them." Outside the study door, Catherine and Ezekiel listened in silence. When Whitaker left the room, Catherine stepped back into the hallway shadows. "That man is dangerous," Ezekiel whispered. "Yes. He isn't afraid." Catherine shook her head slowly. "No. Men like him don't fear danger." "Then what do they fear?" Catherine's eyes grew darker. "Losing control." The gathering was now only 2 nights away. 2 nights until the brethren would return to the cellar. That evening, Ezekiel noticed something unusual. Extra lanterns were being placed around the plantation house. 2 armed men had arrived with Judge Whitaker. "Guards. Whitaker expects trouble," Ezekiel said. Catherine watched them from the balcony. "Good. You wanted them afraid, but now they're prepared." Catherine looked at him. "They're preparing for the wrong enemy." Ezekiel studied her face carefully. "You already know how this ends." Catherine didn't answer immediately. Instead she turned and walked back toward her room. Ezekiel followed. Inside the room, she opened the leather ledger one more time. 2 names were now crossed out. Thomas Barrow. Samuel Dunning. 10 names remained. But Catherine turned to the very last page. The one with Judge Whittaker's name. Her finger rested on the ink. "Everything leads to him," she said quietly. Ezekiel nodded. "He's the leader." "Yes. And leaders don't fall easily." Catherine closed the book. "They don't have to fall easily. Just eventually." Lightning flashed across the sky again. The storm had returned stronger than before. Wind rattled the windows of the plantation house. Ezekiel looked toward the cellar beneath them. "In 2 nights they'll all be down there." "Yes. And that's when we strike?" Catherine shook her head. "No." Ezekiel frowned. "Then when?" Catherine's voice dropped into a calm whisper. "We don't strike during the ritual." "Why not?" "Because that's when they're most careful." Another crack of thunder shook the house. Catherine looked directly into Ezekiel's eyes. "We strike when they think they're safe." Ezekiel felt a chill run down his spine. "When is that?" Catherine turned toward the window where rain lashed against the glass. Her answer was quiet. "But after the ritual ends." Because the brethren of the harvest believed the cellar was the most powerful place on the plantation. But Catherine Rutledge knew something they didn't. The most dangerous moment comes right after powerful men believe they've survived the night. The night before the gathering felt unnaturally quiet. Even the wind seemed to slow as darkness settled over Cypress Grove. Lanterns burned along the porch. Whittaker's guards patrolled the yard with rifles resting on their shoulders. They moved carefully, watching the fields, watching the trees, watching the workers' cabins. But they weren't watching the house itself. And that was exactly what Catherine had expected. Inside her room, she sat by the window. The leather ledger rested on the table beside her. Ezekiel stood near the door. "You're calm," he said quietly. Catherine kept staring out at the dark fields. "I've waited 16 years for tomorrow." Ezekiel studied her carefully. "And after tomorrow?" She finally looked at him. "After tomorrow, this house stops owning people." A moment of silence passed. Then Catherine stood and walked toward the table. She opened the ledger again. 10 names remained. 10 powerful men who believed they controlled everything around them. Her finger slowly moved across the page. "They'll all be here tomorrow night." Ezekiel nodded. "Whittaker, Rutledge, and the others." Catherine closed the book. "And they'll walk into the cellar believing they're safe." Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon again. The storm had returned. Morning arrived gray and humid. Word spread quickly across the plantation. Visitors were coming again. Servants cleaned the house. Extra food was prepared. Wine bottles were brought up from the cellar. To outsiders, it looked like a normal gathering of wealthy landowners. But the tension inside the house told a different story. By sunset, the first carriage arrived. Catherine watched from the balcony. Ezekiel stood behind her. "That's Whittaker," he whispered. The judge stepped out slowly, leaning on his silver cane. His sharp eyes scanned the plantation. Even from a distance, Catherine could feel the weight of his attention. "He's careful," Ezekiel said. "Yes. And dangerous." Catherine nodded. "Which is why he must be the last one alive." One by one, the other carriages followed. Men climbed out wearing dark coats. Their faces serious. No laughter. No casual greetings. The deaths of Barrow and Dunning had changed everything. The brethren of the harvest were no longer confident. They were suspicious. Paranoid. Afraid. Inside the house, the men gathered in the dining room. Silas Rutledge poured drinks with stiff hands. Whitaker sat quietly at the head of the table. No one spoke for several minutes. Finally Whitaker broke the silence. "We have a problem." Everyone in the room already knew that. "Barrow is dead," Whitaker continued. "Dunning is dead." He looked around the table slowly. "And someone is trying to frighten us." One of the men spoke nervously. "Do we know who?" Whitaker's eyes moved toward Silas. "What about the message in your cellar?" Silas shifted uncomfortably. "I told you, someone wrote it on the wall. Anyone could have entered the house." "No." Whitaker leaned forward. "Then someone inside this plantation helped them." The room went quiet. Servants moved carefully around the table, pretending not to hear. Ezekiel stood near the door, his expression calm. Whitaker noticed him. "You." Ezekiel stepped forward slightly. "Yes, sir." "You're the new one." "Yes, sir." Whitaker studied his face carefully. "You arrived shortly before the trouble started." Silas quickly interrupted. "He's just a field healer." Whitaker didn't look convinced. But after a moment, he waved Ezekiel away. "Leave us." Ezekiel stepped back out into the hallway. Catherine was waiting in the shadows. "Well," she whispered. "He's suspicious." "Of you?" "Yes." Catherine nodded slowly. "That means the fear is working." The dinner lasted another hour. Then one by one, the brethren stood from the table. Whitaker tapped his cane against the floor. "It's time." Silas led them down the hallway. Past the kitchen. Toward the pantry. The hidden door opened. One by one, the men disappeared down the staircase. The cellar lanterns flickered to life beneath the house. Catherine and Ezekiel stood silently in the dark hallway. Listening. Footsteps echoing down the stairs. The heavy door closing again. "They're all down there," Ezekiel whispered. Catherine nodded. "Yes. 10 men. And your father. And Whitaker." Ezekiel looked at her. "This is the moment." But Catherine shook her head. "Not yet." Below them, faint voices began chanting. The ritual had started. The brethren believed the cellar gave them power. But Catherine knew something they didn't. The ritual would last almost 2 hours. 2 hours where the most powerful men in the county would be locked in a room beneath the house. Separated from their guards. Separated from the world. Completely alone. Ezekiel looked toward the pantry door. "What are we waiting for?" Catherine walked slowly to the kitchen table. There, she picked up a lantern. Then she opened a small wooden box beside it. Inside were several glass bottles. Thick oil. Lamp oil. Ezekiel stared at them. Then realization hit him. "You're going to burn the house." Catherine's voice was calm. "No." She lifted one of the bottles. "I'm going to burn the cellar." Ezekiel felt the weight of her plan settle in the room. "You'll kill them all." Catherine met his eyes. "Yes. But Whitaker has guards outside. They won't reach the cellar in time." Lightning flashed across the sky outside. Thunder shook the house again. Catherine handed Ezekiel one of the bottles. 16 years, she whispered. 16 years of waiting. From beneath the floor, the chanting grew louder. The brethren of the harvest had no idea what was about to happen. And Catherine Rutledge finally stepped toward the pantry door. Because tonight, the cellar would become their grave. The chanting from the cellar grew louder. Low voices, rising and falling together. The brethren of the harvest had begun their ritual. Candles flickered beneath the floor. Their shadows moved across the stone walls of the cellar. Above them, the house was silent. Too silent. Catherine stood in the pantry doorway holding the lantern. The glass bottles of oil rested beside her feet. Ezekiel watched the hidden door carefully. Once they started, there would be no turning back. 16 years, Catherine whispered again. Her voice carried no hesitation now. Only cold certainty. Ezekiel spoke quietly. If we do this, no one survives down there. Catherine didn't look at him. That's the point. The chanting continued beneath them. The men in the cellar believed they were performing a sacred ritual. They believed they controlled the darkness. But the darkness had been waiting for them. Catherine slowly poured the oil across the wooden floor near the hidden staircase. The liquid spread quickly, soaking into the boards. The smell rose immediately. Sharp. Heavy. Ezekiel poured the second bottle beside it. The oil ran down the edges of the stairs, disappearing into the shadows below. From beneath them, Whitaker's voice suddenly echoed through the cellar. Louder than the others. Commanding. Even through the floorboards, his authority could be felt. Catherine paused. That man believes he rules everything. Ezekiel looked at the lantern flame. In a few minutes, he won't. Catherine took a slow breath. Then she tipped the lantern slightly. The flame danced inside the glass. For a moment, the entire house felt frozen in time. Thunder rolled outside. Rain slammed against the windows. And then, Catherine dropped the lantern. The glass shattered against the oil-soaked floor. Flames exploded instantly. Fire raced across the wood like it had been waiting years to be born. Within seconds, the staircase became a tunnel of fire. The flames rushed downward. Into the cellar. The chanting stopped immediately. Then came the first scream. A sudden burst of panic from below. Men shouting. Chairs scraping. Someone yelling orders. Whitaker's voice cutting through the chaos. Get out. But the staircase was already burning. Smoke poured upward through the pantry. Ezekiel slammed the hidden door shut. The heavy wood locked into place. Below them, the screams grew louder. Frightened. Desperate. For the first time, the brethren of the harvest understood what was happening. They were trapped. Inside the cellar, the fire spread quickly. Oil soaked into the wooden beams. Candles fell to the floor. Flames climbed the walls. The room filled with thick black smoke. Men pushed toward the staircase. But the fire blocked the way. Someone tried to force the door. They pounded against it from below. The wood shook under the blows. Above the cellar, Catherine stood perfectly still. Listening. Every scream echoed through the house. Every desperate cry. Ezekiel looked at her. You waited 16 years for this moment. Yes. The pounding on the door grew louder. Whitaker's voice rose again. Break it down. The brethren tried to force the door together. The wood cracked slightly. Ezekiel saw it. They might break through. Catherine's eyes hardened. Then we finish it faster. She grabbed another bottle of oil and poured it along the base of the door. Then she stepped back. Flames climbed higher. The heat filled the pantry. Below them, the pounding became weaker. The smoke inside the cellar was growing thicker. Men were coughing now. Gasping for air. The screams slowly turned into choking sounds. Then, something unexpected happened. A gunshot exploded beneath the floor. Ezekiel froze. Another gunshot. And another. Whitaker. He was trying to shoot the door open from inside. The wood splintered. A hole appeared in the center of the door. Catherine saw the light flicker through it. "He's still fighting," Ezekiel said. But the gunshot suddenly stopped. The smoke below had become too thick. A heavy thud echoed from the cellar floor. Then another. One by one, the sounds of movement faded. The pounding stopped. The shouting stopped. Only the fire remained. Crackling. Hungry. Slowly consuming everything below. Catherine closed her eyes. Not in fear. Not in regret. But in release. 16 years of rage had finally burned away. Minutes passed. Then Ezekiel spoke quietly. "It's over." But Catherine opened her eyes again. "No." Ezekiel frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked toward the cellar door, where the small bullet hole still smoked. "Whitaker isn't dead." "How do you know?" Catherine's voice was calm. "Because men like him never die easily." As if the house itself wanted to prove her right. Something moved beneath the floor. A faint sound. Weak. But real. A hand slammed suddenly against the door from below. Just once. Then silence returned. Ezekiel looked at her. "You were right." Catherine stepped toward the door slowly. Her face completely calm now. "If Whitaker survived the fire." She grabbed a metal poker from beside the stove. "Then we finish this face to face. Because the leader of the Brethren of the Harvest was still alive. And he was about to crawl out of hell." The fire in the pantry had begun to slow. The oil had burned fast. Now only thick smoke and glowing embers remained around the cellar door. The house itself was still standing. But beneath it, the cellar had become a furnace. Catherine stood in front of the door, the metal poker gripped tightly in her hand. Ezekiel watched the bullet hole in the wood. No sound came from the other side. For a long moment, the house was silent again. Then, a weak cough echoed from below. Catherine didn't move. Whitaker was still alive. Another cough followed. Closer to the door. Ezekiel stepped beside Catherine. "He's trying to reach the stairs." A scraping sound came from the other side. Slow. Painful. Something dragged across the floor beneath the cellar. Whitaker was crawling. The leader of the Brethren of the Harvest, the man who had controlled courts and judges, the man who believed himself untouchable, was dragging himself through ash and smoke toward the door. Another weak slam hit the wood. This time, much softer than before. Catherine knelt down and looked through the bullet hole. At first she saw nothing but darkness and drifting smoke. Then, movement. A shape slowly pulled itself into the faint light from above. Whitaker. His coat was burned. His face blackened with soot. Blood ran down the side of his head. But his eyes were still open. Still sharp. Still dangerous. He saw the light through the hole. And he saw Catherine watching him. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Whitaker laughed. A dry, broken sound. "So." His voice was rough from the smoke. "It was you." Catherine didn't respond. Whitaker coughed again, struggling to breathe. "You played the mad girl very well." Ezekiel tightened his grip on the poker. Whitaker's eyes shifted toward him. "And the slave." Another weak laugh escaped his throat. "I should have known." Catherine finally spoke. 16 years. Whitaker blinked slowly. "Yes. I've heard about your condition." "My condition was the lie your friends created." Whitaker dragged himself closer to the door. The floor beneath him left streaks of ash and blood. "Power requires sacrifices," he rasped. "You sacrificed innocent people. Whitaker smiled faintly. Innocence is a story poor people tell themselves. Catherine's eyes hardened. You murdered a woman in this cellar. Whitaker shrugged weakly. One of many. Ezekiel stepped forward suddenly. And my family? Whitaker looked at him carefully. For a moment, confusion crossed his burned face. Then he remembered. Ah! The slave trader's records. He coughed again. Yes. I signed those. Ezekiel's jaw tightened. You sold them. Whitaker's voice became colder. They were property. The silence that followed felt heavy. Whitaker dragged himself closer to the door again. His fingers appeared through the bullet hole. Blackened. Shaking. But here's the truth, he whispered. You think killing us changes anything? Catherine stared at him. The brethren controlled everything. Whitaker nodded weakly. Yes. And when we're gone? He smiled again. Someone else will take our place. Ezekiel leaned closer to the door. Not this time. Whitaker's breathing became slower. The smoke had done its work. You burned your own house, he murmured. You destroyed your father. Catherine's voice didn't change. He destroyed himself. Whitaker looked at her one last time. For the first time, something new appeared in his eyes. Not fear. Not anger. Respect. You were never insane, he whispered. Catherine stepped closer to the door. No. Whitaker's hand slipped back through the hole. His strength was fading quickly now. But before the darkness took him, he said one final thing. Then remember this. His voice barely audible. Power always returns. His body collapsed against the cellar floor. The movement stopped. The breathing stopped. Silence returned. For the first time in decades, the cellar beneath Cypress Grove held no living member of the brethren. Ezekiel slowly stepped back. It's over. Catherine stood there for a long moment. Listening. Waiting. But nothing moved beneath the floor. Finally she set the poker down. Outside, the storm had begun to fade. Rain slowed against the windows. The sky slowly lightened on the horizon. Morning was coming. Ezekiel looked toward the front door. The guards will discover the fire soon. Catherine nodded. Yes. And when they do? She walked toward the hallway. They'll believe it was an accident. Ezekiel followed her. An accident that killed the most powerful men in the county. Catherine stopped at the top of the staircase. Sunlight was beginning to touch the rice fields outside. Workers would soon wake. Life would continue. But the world beneath it had changed forever. She looked back at Ezekiel. Power doesn't disappear, she said quietly. Whitaker's final words echoed in her mind. Power always returns. But sometimes, Catherine continued. It changes hands. Behind them, the cellar burned quietly beneath the house. And with it, the brethren of the harvest were gone forever. Morning arrived slowly over Cypress Grove. The storm clouds had moved away. Sunlight spread across the rice fields like nothing had happened. But the smell of smoke still hung in the air. Workers noticed it first. Thin gray smoke rising from the side of the plantation house. One of the kitchen servants shouted. Within minutes, the yard filled with people. Buckets of water were rushed inside. Whitaker's guards ran through the front door. What happened? One of them shouted. Ezekiel stood near the hallway calmly. Fire in the pantry, he said. The men rushed toward the smoke. But when they opened the hidden cellar door, the heat forced them back immediately. Flames still burned below. And the smoke pouring upward was thick and black. One guard covered his mouth. Good God! Another looked toward the staircase leading down. Is anyone down there? Silas Rutledge's butler stepped forward nervously. The masters were meeting in the cellar last night. The words fell heavily into the room. The guards looked at each other. Then one of them grabbed a wet cloth and tried to descend the stairs. He made it halfway before coughing violently. Too much smoke. He stumbled back up. No one could survive down there. Outside, word spread quickly. By mid-morning, half the county had gathered near the plantation gates. Carriages arrived. Doctors. Lawyers. Local officials. Everyone asking the same question. What happened inside Cypress Grove? Sheriff Collins arrived just before noon. His horse stopped near the front porch. He stepped down slowly. The same calm expression on his face. But when he smelled the smoke, something in his eyes shifted. Inside the house, he examined the burned pantry carefully. The broken lantern. The scorched floorboards. The cellar door. Terrible accident, one of the guards explained. Looks like a lantern tipped over. Collins didn't respond immediately. Instead he studied the bullet hole in the door. Interesting. One of the guards noticed it. Probably exploded during the fire. Collins crouched down slowly, running his fingers over the splintered wood. His face revealed nothing. Then he stood up. Anyone survive? No, sir. Collins nodded slowly. That means the judge is gone. And Silas Rutledge. And the others. The room grew quiet. Because everyone in that house understood something important. With those men gone, the entire power structure of the county had just collapsed. Collins stepped back toward the hallway. And that's when he saw Catherine standing near the staircase. Her white dress looked untouched by the fire. Her face calm. Almost peaceful. Miss Rutledge, he said. Catherine looked at him gently. Yes, Sheriff. You were here last night. Yes. Did you see how the fire started? Catherine paused, just long enough. I woke up when I smelled smoke. Collins watched her carefully. You didn't hear anything else? Catherine shook her head softly. No. Collins studied her for several seconds. Then he nodded once. Well, it appears your father died in the fire. Catherine lowered her eyes slightly. Yes. The sheriff turned toward the door again. But before leaving, he glanced once more at the cellar door. Something about the scene bothered him. Something that didn't quite fit. But he said nothing. Outside, the crowd had grown even larger. Rumors spread through the town like wildfire. By evening, the entire county knew. The brethren of the harvest were dead. All of them. No secret meetings. No powerful council controlling the courts. No invisible hands guiding the town. Just ashes beneath an old plantation house. That night, Cypress Grove was quiet again. Most of the visitors had left. The guards had gone. Even Sheriff Collins had returned to town. Only a few servants remained. Catherine stood on the balcony watching the dark fields. Ezekiel joined her quietly. They believe the accident story, he said. Yes. No investigation. Catherine shook her head slightly. Too many powerful men died. People will prefer the simple explanation. Ezekiel leaned against the railing. The brethren ruled this county for decades. Yes. And now they're gone. The night air felt lighter somehow. Like the land itself was breathing again. Workers' cabins glowed with lantern light in the distance. For the first time in generations, those people were no longer owned by anyone. Ezekiel looked toward the plantation house behind them. What happens now? Catherine answered without hesitation. Tomorrow we sell the land. Ezekiel raised an eyebrow. Sell it? Yes. To the workers. Silence followed. You're serious? Yes. Your father would never. My father is gone. Her voice carried a quiet finality. The house will be torn down. The fields divided. And this place will belong to the people who actually built it. Ezekiel watched her carefully. You planned all of this. For 16 years. The wind moved gently through the rice fields. Catherine closed her eyes for a moment. Listening. No chanting from the cellar. No secret meetings. No whispers of powerful men hiding in the dark. Just silence. But far away, in another town, in another house. Powerful men were already hearing rumors about what happened at Cypress Grove. And some of them were already wondering something dangerous. If the brethren of the harvest could disappear in a single night, what other secrets might be waiting in the dark? Because Catherine Rutledge had destroyed one secret society. But the world was full of powerful men who believed they could never fall. And sometimes, those men needed a reminder. That power can burn. For weeks after the fire, the county lived in a strange kind of silence. The powerful men who once controlled everything were gone. The courthouse felt different. The streets of the town felt different. Even the way people spoke to each other had changed. The brethren of the harvest had ruled quietly for decades. Judges, landowners, bankers, sheriffs. All bound together by secrets hidden beneath Cypress Grove. And now, they were nothing but ashes. The investigation into the fire ended quickly. Sheriff Collins filed a short report. Lantern accident in the cellar. Fire spread rapidly. All present deceased. No further questions. No deeper search. Some people whispered that the sheriff knew more than he wrote. But no one pushed the matter. Because the truth was something most people didn't want to face. The entire power structure of the county had burned to death in one night. And the town needed time to breathe again. Cypress Grove Plantation closed for nearly a month. Then one morning, something unexpected happened. A notice appeared on the courthouse wall. Signed by Catherine Rutledge. The land was being sold. But not to another wealthy family. Not to a banker. Not to an outside investor. Instead, the fields were being divided. Piece by piece. Sold cheaply to the workers who had lived and labored there for generations. People stared at the notice like it was impossible. Old men shook their heads. Women whispered in disbelief. One man said quietly, "That girl just ended the plantation system in this county." Within days, the land began to change hands. Families who had never owned anything suddenly held legal papers. Small plots of rice fields. Tiny houses. Pieces of the land they had once worked as servants. Some cried when they received the documents. Others simply stood there in silence, trying to understand that their lives had changed forever. Cypress Grove Plantation slowly disappeared. The big house was torn down. The burned cellar filled with stone and dirt. No one wanted to rebuild over that place. By winter, nothing remained of the Brethren's secret meeting hall. Just a quiet field where grass began to grow. Ezekiel stood there one afternoon watching workers clear the last pieces of the old foundation. Catherine joined him. "It's strange," he said. "What is?" 6 months ago, this place ruled the entire county. He looked around the open land. Now it's just dirt. Catherine nodded softly. "That's what power really is." "What do you mean?" "It only exists because people believe in it." The wind moved gently across the empty field. Ezekiel looked at her. You destroyed the brethren. Catherine shook her head slightly. No. They destroyed themselves. How? They believed they were untouchable. Ezekiel smiled faintly. That's usually how it ends. A carriage waited near the road.